Immigrant Names and Manifest Searches. This is Part 2. I am Joel Weintraub. This is a revised YouTube video. The original online talk was deleted. It's gone. I found additional resources and immigrant records on the topic, so many that I decided to remake the video into a 3-part video series. This is Part 2. Have you seen Part 1? Here are Part 1 topics. I did a short summary of the naturalization process. It includes using the preliminary petition form to check the immigrant's arrival information, and if verified, a certificate of arrival was issued. It was needed before the petition for citizenship was created. Then I covered immigrant names and spelling, name changes, manifest searches, and then looked at actual immigrant records who told us why they changed or varied their name, and I did first and middle name variations. So here's what a certificate of arrival looks like. As you will find out in Part 3 of this series, Zul Horinda sued Ellis Island, and on the day of the trial, they issued this document. It was necessary for him to proceed to the petition stage of the process with this document. If he didn't have it, he was out of luck. Part 2 will start where Part 1 ended, by looking at some other names that immigrants said they used from the preliminary form for petition for naturalization. I hope my viewers see the series in the order it was recorded. So here is a look at what we're going to be covering. These are actually categories, and I'm going to see the categories with actual immigrant records. Part 3, which is going to be recorded in a week or two, has some very interesting examples. Aliases and hiding names, unrelated family members on the manifest, used another person's ticket, misunderstandings by officials, and then a bonus where somebody sued Ellis Island. So here is a colored review of the various name variation categories and where they are on the 3 videos. My sample. I looked through about 900 preliminary forms and more than once, more than twice. I saved for possible use those that indicated they used another name or spelling and the reason for it, and those who the clerks were unable to verify. They were looking for certificates of arrivals. I also saved records that had correspondence or made a point that I wanted to emphasize. There are more such records than I included in this video series. So let's start looking at actual records. Surname, translations, Americanizations, and we'll look at immigrants who indicated they used names in the U.S. that were translations of the original family names or approximations of English American names. I'll start with some of the more detailed records. So here is Frank Shimshiner. He's born in 1907. In Poland, he arrives as a 6 or 7-year-old, and we're going to look at his 1928 preliminary form. He actually had help filling out this form, perhaps from his father. This form was 4 pages long. That's what the record showed. And in general, the preliminary form is 4 pages long. The first part is my main concern. Frank states, as you can see on the top, that he has never used another name. We will see. Also note, and I'll highlight that, also note Catherine, his mother's first name, and he traveled to the U.S. with her. Show you the bottom of this form, the first page. I'll also tell you that this grayish background color of these files are from the Family Search site. If you see a form with a yellowish background color, it's from the New Orleans records, and there are quite a number of those. The show notes will show where these records came from. They're all online. So if we look at this bottom part, we see that he came in 1913. The ship name is there, etc. But the form said unable to verify. If you notice that, unable to verify. Well, he was asked to fill out a new form, the standard practice for this unable to verify. Hopefully with better information, this new form, and he had to return both forms to the authorities so they look again. It doesn't look like they told him specifically what the problem was. So there is little difference between the applications. And he says here, "Dear sirs, I have filled out the application and given the information required the best I could. Mother doesn't remember the date of our arrival, and I was young at the time." So he's assuming that the error is something about the date of arrival. That's not what the problem was, actually. So here's his updated form. Notice the pencil lines on each side of the form indicating they wanted him to redo all the information, which he did, basically duplicated it. He also interpreted the name on the ticket, this F. Meisler, to mean the ship or shipping company and not his manifest name. That's what they wanted. So some of these questions can be ambiguous to our immigrants. The upper left box has just a clerk's signature. There are check marks against the name, right now hidden from you, ship, port, and date. So that's a good sign. That means that they found his record. And they verified the information for a certificate of arrival. Well, let's see what's hiding in that form. Uh-oh, he's not Frank Joseph Shinshiner on the manifest. He's František Simsanger. That's the reason they probably couldn't find him. Initially. Now, whenever I see a unable to verify, I try myself using the Steve Morse Gold form to see with this modern database, I could also find his record on the manifest. So my standard operation go-to strategy is to use the first three letters of each of the first and last name. And then I entered some information about when he arrived. Couldn't get any results that way. Could not get any results that way. However, if I just put down Shimshiner and I changed it to sounds like, the name sounds like, indeed, I do find him a record using the gold form. So there's different ways of using this online search tool, and it was successful in this case. It was successful. Did the immigration clerks go through every line on the ship manifest looking for Frank? There were over 1,500 names on that ship. Probably not. They usually use something called a book index. I'm going to show you how that worked. So the preliminary forms were filled out by the immigrant. They sent them along with the declaration, and this is explained in more detail in the first video, sent it to the district director of naturalization. And if the ship arrived after June 29th, 1906, it was then sent to the port of arrival for verification. In Ellis Island's case, there are 14,000 volumes of ship manifests. They're not going to go looking through them and even looking through a single ship manifest. Instead, starting about 1906, these preliminary forms were sent to, let's say, Ellis Island, and they had something called a book index. And I will show you in more detail what a book index is. It will tell you on what sheet and what line the person you're looking for is on. And then you would go to the ship manifest and then go to that particular place. It would save you quite a bit of time. If you found the person and everything matched to some of the information on the preliminary forms, which did duplicate some of the questions on the manifest, you would then issue a certificate of arrival to the Court of Naturalization. Okay. I explained these book indexes in more detail on a YouTube video called Finding Difficult Passages on the Ellis Island Manifest. And all of these addresses, these websites, I will show you on the show notes. So I found on FamilySearch.org, I found the book index for Frantisek's Journey. It's on the Crown Prince Wilhelm. You go to the S pages. There are actually, I think, at least 3 pages that have S surnames on the ship. These pages show a letter, so these are all S's, and then they're ordered not by alphabetical by last name, but by sheet and line number. So you can see here there is sheet 20, line, I'm not sure what that is, 2030, sheet 21, etc. Okay. Remember the name of his mother who he traveled with? I'm going to quiz you on that. Can you find Frantisek's record? Okay, here we go. Can you find his record? If you looked at the very bottom, you will see that there's somebody called Katerina Simsanger, and I think they would have picked that up. The book indexes were in much better shape, obviously. Most of this damage occurred in the late 1930s and early 1940s. And then you can see on the left side that Catherine, is starting on sheet 29 and then list 14. List 14. So here is sheet 29 of that ship manifest. And there is line 14, and there is Katerina Simjena, and also Frantisek. And you see some of the notations there. Notations are very interesting. The ones on the right side are an indication of searches for certificates of arrival. The clerks were told in the late 1920s to avoiding fraud to put these annotations there, so that a line couldn't be used by more than one person seeking naturalization. The next one I want to talk about is Willie Cohen. Cohen's a very common name, and so it might be difficult to say, hey, that's actually the person that Cohen that represents on that manifest. He was born in 1903 in Russia, and arrived in 1922. We're going to look at his 1928 preliminary form. And again, I see in the upper left, stamped, unable to verify. Now, this is the original form. It turns out that he was able to redo this form. They asked him to resubmit both of the original and this new one, but this is obviously the original. New Orleans generally does not scan and did not presumably preserve the updated form. He indicates here that he used Willie because it corresponds to the Russian name. In this case, the follow-up form was included, though. So what was his original name? It was something like Welty, was something like that. And now the updated form, sometimes what the immigration clerks did was they took some of the corrections and then in pencil put them on the original form. So we see here now that Kogan was what was on the ticket, was really on the ticket. Now, in this particular case, actually, and I might have been wrong when what I just said, was that in fact the updated form is included in this record. But even in the updated form, they found that there were misrepresentations or miscorrelations between his name and what was on the manifest. Now he says, I use that name of Willie Cohen because it is easier. The name on the steamship ticket, though, was Velvel Kogan. So instead of Cohen, it was Kogen, and certainly the first name was quite different on the actual manifest. And again, I'll go down here, and there he has arrived on the Olympic. If you look at the very bottom, you will see that he's traveling with his brother, Chaim Kogan, now naturalized. And we're going to be talking about Chaim later. It's not his brother, actually. Well, that's an interesting story. You notice that the ticket was purchased by probably another brother in New Orleans. His name was Jack Cohen. That's who he is going to arrive to. Now, actually, I had trouble finding these two using the gold form, and it wasn't the problem of the gold form, it was the problem of the transcriber to go to the database. So you see on the bottom is the actual manifest for these two, Haim Kogan and Velvel Kogan. And the problem is that if I wanted to look up Haim Kogan, that the transcriber had transcribed it with two G's. And if I wanted to look up Velver Kogan on the transcription, he was 18 years old, but somehow the transcriber put down there was 38. So this is a type manifest. And even with a type manifest, the transcribers were making errors. And those two problems, because of the way I was trying to search for him, created problems for me. I finally found these people because I did the first three letters of their last name, KOG, and some information about their arrival, ships, and dates, etc. So I got all the KOGs, and then I went down the line, and then I realized, look, those are the two that I was looking for. Most of the records on this video will be shown cropped to the name part of the form. So the first one on the top says about his name variation. This is my name properly translated. And his name is Steve James. So Stavakis is obviously Steve. I didn't know what James was necessarily. But then I did find another record. This is another individual who changes his name, both his original first and last name, to James Camber. You can see the not only the shortening of the name, but also the attempt to translate it. And we're going to be looking at a number of these. Sam Mitchell, Salvatore Miscelli, said the other one was an Italian spelling. Or here we have Jacob Zilberg, Z, becomes Jacob Silberg because of Russian spelling. On the top we have John Silvassi. He was Janis the Zil Vassi. He says it is the Hungarian way of spelling. And then we have somebody, Julius Shushan, which I think is that. He was Yindel. Looks like Sosan, and he says because of English translation. Now, if you notice that for some reason New Orleans lined out some names, they didn't block them out. I'm not quite sure why they did that. The information, I think, is very valid underneath these names. Here we have somebody whose original name was Sewell Schluffman, and he actually asked for a name change, which I show you part of his card down there. And he has a description of why he went from Sewell Schluffman to a name of Isidore Slipman. He says, in the U.S., Isidore Schluffman in Polish, it was my family name in Europe. So the ability to change name was actually part of the 1906 change in immigration and naturalization laws, and people could change their name that way. But as I pointed out in part 1, people who used a name, that was their name. You didn't have to legally do that to be able to use new names by immigrants. Some of the other things, here we have somebody by the name of Solomon Shushan. He says English translation from Solon Zuzan. And then on the bottom, we have Louis Bozan, and originally he was Elias George Bouzas, he says, on account of American spelling. Immigrants wanted to fit in, and they felt that they were picking names that were more American, more fitting for their new country. Here we have Nick Blausch, who was Klaus Bauer, quote, for the idea to spell the name better. I think maybe Nick is probably a nickname. On the top, we have Gustav Nelson. He used to be Gustav Nilsson, Nilsson, and he says, well, that country name is the Swedish spelling. So the other one is the American spelling. And then we have Moshe Hirsch Silva. He becomes Morris Silva. He says Morris Silver, or in English, Morris Silva. I use that name because he misinterpreted what that question is. He said he interpreted it as, what are you using this name to begin with? Well, I got it at birth. And then we have here somebody by the name of Shepsel Katzowitz. He becomes Samuel Katzel, near to American names. Okay. The next group of immigrants, their explanations of why they have name variations are they're easier to use, easier to spell or write, easier to pronounce. Often the conclusion is that their names become shortened. So Morris Bressler looks like Mosa Bressler. He thought it might be reversed here. It is more American. So you go from Moses to Morris. It's interesting that the immigrants, they couldn't figure out whether it was their old country's name that was their full, true, and correct name, or it was the name they were going to be using in the United States. So you can determine or decide which name is their new name, which name is their old name. Here we have Felix Gutkowski, and he says it was shorter to just use Felix. But this is interesting. Note how fluid the first name can be for immigrants, but the reluctance of immigrants to change their last name, at least this close to the immigration into the U.S. So this generation wanted to hold on to these names longer, I think. I think there was actually a study done indicating that the longer a family was in the United States, the more Americanized names became. A little bit more detail for Jalmari Kinnunen. He was born in Finland. He arrived in 1909. And you'll see that a couple of things here. He generally, for his first name, either used Jalmari or put an H in front of it. He also indicates that he used another surname called Erickson. And it's a little hard to see this, but he indicated that father used it on account of, and that's all very difficult to pronounce. Maybe it's father used Erickson on account of it was easier to pronounce. I'm not sure, but I think they did find this. There was no unable to verify. Here is his manifest. You can see that he actually used Jalanari on the manifest, even though he didn't remember that when he did this preliminary form. He also, on this preliminary form, was asked, if you wish to have your name changed, give your full name. So he said, yeah, on the preliminary form, he wanted to be his last name Erickson, and he used the H in front of his name. And I tracked down his petition for naturalization online. So he was successful to create a petition. And on the bottom, you can see that he asked for a name change upon consideration of the petition of Jalmari Kinnunen. It says that they will give him the name of Jalmari Erickson. So he actually legally changed his name. But a lot of immigrants didn't do that. They just used the new name, and that was perfectly acceptable. Some of the others. Here we have Ham Kanofsky. He says of short spelling, he wanted to change his name. His original name, I guess, was Chaim Kristanwaski. My grandfather was Chaim. He changed his name to Hyman. He said it was more American, just like the person on the bottom. This person on the bottom decided his new name would be Hyman Perez, and his old country name was Chaim Peraki, and he says, for convenient pronunciation. Here we have a person who ended up as Joe DeMarc. His old country name is Giuseppe DeMarc as well, and he said it was for short, easier written. And then on the bottom we have somebody whose name was, it looks like Wyeth, W-E-I-T-H, and he decided to become Lewis White because it was easier understood. Easier understood. So Sam Verderam says that name was picked because it was easier and shorter than Salvatore Verderam de Vincenzo. You can see how terrible I am pronouncing people's names. And then on the bottom, we have someone who said that they changed their name from Giorgio to George because it was more easily spelled and understood. They wanted to fit in. Again, changing first names more than changing last names. Here we have eventually Raymond Mark, who was originally Simando something or other, Moschusi, and he said it was easily spoken. And then on the bottom, we have William Mazurkowitz. Again, it was easier to pronounce rather than that first name. Now, a lot of these immigrants had people help them fill out these forms, and my guess is there was a certain amount of boilerplating of names that people would go to fit into the line. So there may be some original thoughts of these people about why they're changing names, but there's also an indication maybe that they just chose from a list. Here we have Steele Kaskin, who was originally Sturgis Kaskinis. Again, it was easier to pronounce. And then we have Hercules George, who actually shortened his last name from Georgius to a single one here. We have William, probably Cronus was his new name, Vasilis with an HR. H names are, it's H and a consonant are difficult to pronounce, I think, in the U.S. And he said, it is more Americanized, my former being mispronounced by many. And then on the bottom, we have someone who somehow or other got the name of Nestor, Heino, and his original name was Nesta Peltomia. I'm not quite sure why he got these names. They're easy to pronounce, but did he just pick some random names, or there must be a story behind that? Here we have on the top, again, somebody who's using a new name, a Herbert Tatter, of convenience, other too long. Maybe one can go from Boris to Herbert. I don't know how he got the name Tatar. And then on the bottom here is a person who had a complicated middle and last name, Valdemar. He wasn't sure exactly what was on the name on the steamship ticket, which would have been on the manifest. And I did a look on that, and he actually did the Fride name, which he was right to begin with in terms of using the name of Valdemar, Fride. He actually reduced the middle name to Matthew. It is shorter, more convenient, and satisfactory English translation. Here we have a person who you can see on the upper left is unable to verify. They couldn't figure out his name. And it's kind of interesting because he said here, or at least on the form, he said, well, I am, it's not clear what the original name is, by the way. He says the name on the steamship ticket was Michael Ladazinski. So then this other name is Max London. Well, that's interesting. It turns out, actually, you can't find them under those first names. And you can see that typed on here, probably from the updated form. And that's in brackets I'm showing you. In fact, let me see. I can blow that up. Is that they typed in, he actually, on the manifest, came in as Jacob Lodazinski. So this person went through 3 different first names on this form. It is much easier to pronounce and spell it. And that's where I found him on the manifest. Some others. Here we have Alexander Vayda. He was originally Vajda because he said it was much easier to pronounce. And then we have somebody whose name was Solomon Solomon Stambolzik, who says, my name being a Russian name was hard to pronounce. Well, it's not going to be hard to pronounce by Sam Stembel, right? But for the people in the U.S. he interacted with. This is one of these index cards I found online for Stam. But you can see he applied for naturalization under Sam Stembel. Some people applied for naturalization under their own country name and then asked for a name change or just went about doing their business, etc. Here we have a person who decided he wanted to be John Sepon. His original name was Ivan, and then we have a KNO something or other name. He says it was easier to pronounce and written. On the bottom, we have someone who had 4 names, and he decided just to abbreviate N.K. Owens for the first 2 names for it being shorter. So some of these explanations are explanations that people do today also. It's not a surprise why people change their variations of names. Here we have somebody whose name is Isaac Greenberg. He becomes Edward Berg. It's more English. And then here we have somebody that I guess his original name was Udall Bernstein, and he becomes Eugene Bernstein because it said it is the American pronunciation. I think what he means is somehow it's the American spelling, variations of spelling. Ludwig Lawson becomes Louis Lawson. It's more convenient to use. And Frank Kopaz becomes, he was Hiranko because it's easy to pronounce. Here we have somebody who changed their first name from Asniv to Agnes because it's easier for people to pronounce. Somebody who went from Christo, probably, Ballasclo to Christ Ballas, because he says on account of above name for being too long. Lots of people in that category of the ones that I took aside. Let's look at the using surname of relatives already here. Those relatives already changed their names in some way or another, spelling, translations, etc. And so the newcomers coming in would said, hey, that's the name that I'm going to be using. And the Watsky family is a good example of this. So here on the top, A person by the name of Itzik Zidovesky becomes Irving Watsky for convenience. You notice that his mother is Rivka. And about the same year, I think it was the same year, a person by the name of Moshe Zidovsky becomes Morris Watsky for convenience. Both of them for convenience. They have the same mother's name on there. The maiden name is shown. And they're both going to a person in New Orleans who I think is their brother, called Harry Watsky. Harry Watsky. So I looked up these two. There's Rivka, you see in both of these. I looked up these two, and I found there were lots of people who came in to New Orleans and changed their name or were known by Watsky's name. So the top one is Irving. The next one is Morris. Then we have Yankel becomes Julius. We have somehow Elias becomes Alex. Enia, E-N-I-A, becomes Anne Watsky. And then we have somebody who is Sloma becomes Sam Watsky. And you notice the last name, the European name, can vary because spelling doesn't count. Names count, but spelling of these immigrants, you know, if you're not willing to relax your assumptions about how names are spelled, you're going to have a hard time in genealogy. And what tickled me is it looks like they all got together in the 1950s and they brought over their mother. So the mother, Rivka, also changes her name to Reba Watsky, and there she becomes a naturalized citizen. That's what my grandfather and his three brothers did for my great-grandmother to get her to the U.S. All chipped in, brought her over. Okay, here's some more. Here we have a person whose name was Albert Galenzik, and he becomes Emil Gould. And why? Because my brothers who preceded me to America, upon their naturalization, had their names changed to Gould. And then we have a person by the name of Borik Beichauer becomes Boris Burke, because he says, my family have used that name for Americanization. Let's look at a little more detail with Vangel Costa. There's some problems about looking him up, and that's one of the reasons I want to do some more on this. He's born in Greece in 1902. And you can see in the upper left, they were unable to verify the information he gave. So he says, my true name is Vangelis Konstantin, but I've used the name of Vangel Costa. So he made the name change before he came to the U.S. So on the manifest, he used his last name as Costa. So that was already happening. No, some clerk at Ellis Island didn't say to Konstantin, you know, you should be Costa, right? He had already made that decision. And then down here, you can see that there's some markings from the updated form, exactly what it was like. He's going to his brother, etc. So this was just before quotas, so I'm assuming it did not pose a problem with these changes of people coming in. What did he actually come in under? Well, I had trouble finding him on the gold form, the Steve Morse gold form. So I went out and actually found his naturalization papers, and there is his certificate of arrival, and his name is not Vangel, it's Evangelos Costa. Now the problem here is that this is not quite correct. Usually these certificate of arrivals are what is on the manifest itself. But the manifest doesn't show this Evangelos Costa. It has these names there, but they're wrong. And I'll show you what I mean by that. That's a little mystery. Here is on the top the actual manifest. And what they did was they reversed the names. They put down Costa for his given name, and the family name was Evangelist. So if you did searches on first name, last name, it would come up negative. And the database that this is based on did the same thing. They decided that an evangelist would be the last name. And I think that's probably through the clerks at Ellis Island until he said, no, I came on that ship. This is my name. And some bright person figured this out. Clerks at Ellis Island were pretty good family historians. Some other reasons why people varied their spelling for business. Here we have somebody who decided he would be H. Gordon instead of Herman Kaplan for business purposes. The one on the bottom becomes somehow Peter Bassel. I don't know why, though I can see why maybe the last name would turn into Bassel. And he said, I find it more convenient for business. Or here we have somebody who becomes Jack Joseph. Now this is cute. His original name is Yankel Kowalski. And see, you don't know for sure whether this new name, Jack Joseph, would be the name he now uses in the United States all the time, but in this case, just for business purposes. And he says here, you can read this, he says, my uncle's name is Joseph, and I got a business by the name of Joseph Men's Shop. So he decided he would become Jack Joseph. Well, that's his business name. I don't know whether, he decided that would be the name everybody would call him. On the bottom, we have somebody who decided that one of the names he used was Sandor Callie. I put this in here. His name is actually Alexander Garfunkel. And he says, having been an actor, it was a better stage name. So people were worried because they were asked to fill out this preliminary form completely and fully. And so they said, gee, did I use another name sometime? Maybe I better figure it out. And so this is an actor. Want to look in more detail at Max Wiesendanger. He was born in 1893 in Switzerland. He arrived in 1922. And he says, I've used another name. The name was Max Weissman. I used that name, misspelled name caused repeated loss of my mail. I get this feeling that Max was a perfectionist here. I know from the correspondence in his file, and there is some, that he always used his Max Wilhelm Wiesendanger name. So maybe this was just, like a mailbox thing. He was born in Switzerland in 1893. I usually do a lot more research with these people. When they come in, there he is, Max Wiesendanger. And you can see that what attracted my interest was that there was lots of changing on the manifest. That's unusual. It's usually done on ship. But he argued that wasn't his name. He wasn't Albert, but he was Max. His wife was not Louisa, it looks like, but Johanna. Isn't it crazy? His age was wrong. You begin to wonder about this person. And in fact, what they did was they put him before a special inquirer. Eventually, he was admitted. And the special inquirer said, why are we looking at you? Because you're potentially a likely public charge. But they were admitted. Now, I'm reading between the lines. I'll show you some very interesting things about this. First of all, this couple came in on second class, second cabin. They had money. That's strange. Why are they in Ellis Island? They should have been let off at the dock in New York and New Jersey. So they asked him a question. whether you're in possession of $50 and of less, how much? And they could either say yes, etc. And he said, we have $200. This is my interpretation. $200. Now, some of the people on this manifest, when they said they had more money, the clerks asked to see it. So they asked to see it, and it says claims 200, shows 50. Shows 50. And then where it says, where are you going to? Where are you going to? The manifest itself, which is made in Europe, said he was going to his uncle Wysen Dagger in Portland, Oregon. But then writing on top, it says, claims not going to uncle, does not know where he's going. No wonder he ended up in special inquiry. Max violated my rule number 1 of getting through Ellis Island. Don't stand out at Ellis Island, or bad things can happen to you. Some people didn't like their original name, like today. So here we have someone whose name is Moishe Moishe Alterman becomes Morris Alderman because I preferred it to my given name. Maybe there's some discrimination going on there. Here we have a person who used the name Hoff, Hoff. His original name was Off, and people used to make fun of Orff. That's why he changed it. On the bottom, we have somebody who's Yankel Solomon Parnas. He decides he likes the middle name Solomon Parnas better. I do not like he calls it a surname, it's actually a given name, my surname Yankel. Now, there are people who have used their mother's maiden name. I want to show a case study of this, especially if any of you are dealing with Italian immigration. Here we have a person by the name of Tony Leroy. He's born in 1897. He comes in 1908. So how old is he? 11 years old. And he applies, and you see in the upper left, unable to verify no vessel. No vessel. Well, what's that about? So we look down here. I want you to see, for instance, that first of all, on the top, we'll look at that first, that this is a variation of the form. There's no maiden name of the mother question. And when they ask for the name of the ship, he says, I can't remember. Can't remember. Well, that's not going to get him very far. So they send him a letter back, and I show a bunch of these on part 1, the timeline of how people go through this process. And it says to Tony, it's not been possible to find a record of your entry into the U.S. from the facts given by the form you sent in, the 2214, which is this form you've been looking at. So the form you sent in is attached to this letter, and a blank one is sent to you. Please fill out this new form, and then return both of these back to us. Talk with your family or friends who came over and with you to be sure and get the right date and name of the ship you came on. Send in your passport, ship's cards, baggage labels if you have any. They'll be given back to you. Make every effort to give correctly the date of your arrival and name you used at the time of arrival. So he sends back the form. Basically, it's the same thing. On the upper left, there's the signature of the clerk, so that's successful. He now says he's not Tony Laurie. He now says he's Antonio Lauria, but this time he gives his mother's maiden name. And you can see in pencil above it, they do find him, but they find him under his mother's maiden name. He's Antonio Tangara. He's not Laurie, which is father's name. And that was standard. And they do find him on that ship. They find him on the ship that he says he's on. Whoops. Now it's showing on the bottom. So he did show them the ship, but now he shows them the name. And here is the manifest showing there's his mother, Tangaro. There's Antonio, the son, 11 years old, and Salvador, son is also there as well. So don't be surprised if you're dealing with an Italian family and the mother comes with children that they're using the mother's maiden name. So whenever I see something like this, here we have somebody whose original name is Munro or Musso, Pietro. He says, I've used another name, a maiden name. That would be Calabresa. On the bottom one here, we have somebody who he says his name is Antonio Gull, Guell. That's the name of my steamship. But my mother's name is Gutierrez. And I've used that name. But then here's a person who doesn't look like they're Italian, who said he's using a maiden name under which I immigrated. I'm not quite sure why he's doing that, but that's always a possibility. Or this one, which appears that Felice Alberico, who said that's what the name of my steamship ticket was when they actually searched for him. They crossed that out and put down his mother's maiden name. So always be aware of that. Using a stepfather's name or an adopted name. Well, this is a complicated one, and you'll see some of these explanations here. We have somebody whose last name can be either Perron or Haynes, and he's telling us that one of them was originally his stepfather's name, his name being Haynes, and I enlisted in the U.S. Army under that name. But while in the service, I married and resumed my own father's surname of Perron and had my Army records changed accordingly. Here's one that was kind of an interesting one. It attracted my attention. Bronislaw Lazarowski. He was born in 1892 in Poland. He arrived as an 18-year-old. And there is his preliminary form. It's a little bit of the older version. He said, I've also used the name of Bronislaw Demus, D-M-U-S. I was advised to use it because it was simpler to pronounce. Now, when I see I was advised, I'm interested in the Ellis Island name change myth and people forcing names on immigrants. And I want to know who advised you in terms of that. So I did additional work on this. I found out that the manifest shows him as Bronislaw DMUS on there. He says from his preliminary form in the bottom that the names of some of the passengers I traveled with are Mr. and Mrs. Adam DMUS. Okay, that's interesting. So his arrival ship name was wrong, but the date and port were correct. I found his actual petition and the certificate of arrival to help resolve his information. His manifest shows he was traveling, as it turns out, with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Adam DMUS. So on the top, and this is one of the reasons why it was difficult to find him, is that it looks like it's a T there, Tunis, not DMUS. And there's Adam, 42, his mother, something like Casarina, 40, and he's actually 28. But you can see on the transcription found on the gold form that they transcribed that as 8. And they were going to a friend whose last name was Lazarowski. My guess is that since the mother and son were from the same town, that perhaps Adam Tunis is a stepfather, and it was decided for logistics it would be easier if they all had the same name, going through Ellis Island and the immigration process. But you can see how some of the transcription errors will trick you up when you're trying to find these people. Herman Levitin, you've met this person. This is Chaim Kogan. Why is he here? He was born in 1903 in Russia. Remember his brother we talked about before? And he says, hey, I am Herman Levitin. I am also Chaim Kogan because I have been raised by a Mr. and Mrs. Cohen. So whether he's adopted or whatever, they considered them brothers, Chaim Kogan. And on his naturalization card, he uses both names. So you're able to find him with either of the names he used. Now, the last two that I'm going to talk about, I'm not sure why they were held up. So this category is giving them a hard time. Marko Vulatek, born 1881 in Austria, arrived in 1906. There's nothing on the box in the upper left, and the reason is because the box on the right with the X says you didn't send in your declaration of intention. That was one of the requirements here. Now, Marco says here, I have not used another name, but it really probably shook him that something must be wrong with this entire thing. So he tried again. And here he tried again. You see it's still blank on that box in the upper left. Still blank. And now he says, well, I've used another name, Marko Waltich. Well, heck, that's not much difference, actually. You've seen enough of these. And he says, I cannot spell. When I come to this country, only talk. Only talk. He thinks his name on the manifest, on the ticket, was Marko Volatek, and actually it was. So somehow or other, they didn't like this. They returned it to him. They didn't make any real changes here. And the other thing is this, that he came in February of 1906. He didn't need a certificate of arrival. They didn't need to look for it because the law is only after June 29th of 1906. Maybe they rejected it because, hey, maybe you weren't in February, maybe it was in June. We can't quite find you. So he was really frustrated. So he tried again. You can see here on the manifest, he's Marko Vulatek. That's what he said. And this poignant letter to them. Honorable Sir, I cannot make any better correction than I fill in on Form 2214, attached and dated January 9, 1928, because it is all true, so far I know. Passenger on ship I come on, I cannot remember. It's one of the things I asked. I cannot remember many name, because it was long ago and the people were stranger, Italian and Greeks. Only I remember two men, blah, 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 blah. I cannot provide passport or baggage check because it burned up in house at Adamston, West Virginia, 1917. Other way, I write my name, Marko Waltek. I write on my first paper, that's the declaration. It I use because I do not know how to spell when I come to this country. So when I talk to person my name without spelling, they write Marko Waltek. Someone helped him do the declaration. So I use myself too, but I think it is same. Marko or Marko, Waltek or Voltek, only in English, spelled different way, etc. And they finally, after another form, said, fine, you're okay. And then we have Domenico Giovanazzo. Also, reject the first form. Dear sir, please find a new application, fill it out. I'm sorry. They rejected his first form, so he filled in the second one, and this is his reply to them. And he says to them, Dear sir, enclose, find please the new application, the new 2214 form, filled as marked with pencil by you. So the pencil marks he needed to fill in, together with a petition previously made, also a certificate of birth from Italy and a certificate from the mayor of my hometown, stating the date when the necessary papers were issued, For the passport, probably I landed in the U.S. in May or June from the steamship Lombardia. Cannot remember the exact date. I wrote to my mother in Italy to find out. They went to the agent who had already died. Regarding my name, since I am here in the U.S., I've been used only one of my two names, Domenico only, but my full and true name is Francisco, blah, 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 blah. And as I lost the passport, I can remember which one of the two names appeared in my steamship ticket. In other words, they got him in a pretzel. He actually is Francisco Giovinazzo on the manifest. And he's on the Lombardo. He's in May. And so this unable to verify, that's his first form. I don't know why they were unable to verify. He puts down, I landed in New York in April. He did it in May. They should have looked at dates before and after. Maybe they figured if they rejected him to begin with, he would give better information. And so when you actually look at the new form, there's not much difference between the two forms. Not much difference. The difference is that he now says, I saw my name Domenico, etc. He now has changed a little bit the date of the voyage. The ship is right. Everything is all right. I hope you got a view of that, a feeling for immigrants and the pressures they had to change names. Part 3, you're going to have some very interesting and very complicated sorts of name changes. Aliases, hiding names, having a person in your, quote, family that's not a member of your family, somebody uses another person's ticket and the ramifications for that, and he couldn't get, I don't think, citizenship because of it. Officials misunderstanding names and putting things down on documents. And then a bonus of a person who sued Ellis Island. And that's an interesting case just by itself. So I hope you enjoyed that second of the 3-part series. I have YouTube talks on genealogy topics, census resources in Ellis Island immigration, and also on novelty zithers, biology songs. I'm a retired professor of biology and have a lot of talks on natural history topics, birding optics, California birds. Bye-bye.